I'll die before I let you take her. The words tore out of Elena Bennett before she could stop them, her voice steady even as her hands trembled against the wooden door frame. 11:47 at night. August in Boston. The air hung thick and humid, pressing against her skin like a wet cloth, and the hallway of the South End apartment building felt suddenly smaller than it had ever been. 20 men in black suits lined the narrow corridor, their shoulders broad enough to make the space feel like a closing fist. The shoes on their feet gleamed despite the cracked and water-stained linoleum floor. Imported leather. Italian craftsmanship. Each pair probably cost more than everything Elena owned. Behind her, in the small bedroom 3 feet away, 6-year-old Ava slept with tubes running from her chest to a portable heart monitor that beeped softly. Steadily. A rhythm that meant her daughter was still alive. That meant the surgery they could not afford, the one that had to happen within 3 days, was still theoretically possible. In front of her stood Derek Collins. Her ex-boyfriend. The man whose hands had once left bruises shaped like apologies. The man who had paid off a cop named Valdez $200 to ignore the restraining order she had filed 3 weeks earlier. Derek's jaw was clenched. His eyes held the kind of fury that comes from being told no by someone he believed he owned. But it was not Derek who made Elena's breath catch in her throat. It was the man standing behind him. Tall. Impossibly tall. 6'2" at minimum, with shoulders that seemed to fill the hallway despite the space around him. His suit was charcoal gray, tailored so precisely it looked like it had been painted onto his body. The fabric alone, she could tell just by looking, cost more than 3 months of her rent. His shirt was white and open at the throat, revealing a chest marked with a thin silver chain and a scar that ran from his collarbone downward, disappearing beneath the fabric. His hair was dark, cut close to his skull, with silver threading through the temples. His face was angular, severe, the kind of face that had seen things that ordinary people should never see. And his eyes. His eyes were the color of storm clouds gathering before a tornado, and they were fixed entirely on Elena with an expression she could not read. 20 men in black. Derek Collins with his fists clenched. And a Mafia boss named Giovanni Corsetti, though Elena did not know his name yet, watching her as if she were the only person in the building. She held the locket in her left hand. Her mother's locket. Gold so worn it was nearly white, dangling from a chain so thin it looked like it might snap under the weight of what it carried. Inside the locket was a photograph of her mother at 22, smiling in a way Elena could never quite manage. She pressed the locket against her sternum like a shield. "I'll die before I let you take her." She had said the words to Derek, but she could feel them echoing back at her from the man with the storm cloud eyes. The hallway was so quiet you could hear the heart monitor beeping inside Ava's room. Beep. 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 A steady countdown. 3 days until the surgery. 3 days until Elena had to find $22,000 that did not exist, that would never exist, that might as well have been asking her to find the moon in her pocket. She had $17 left. $17 to last until her next shift at the diner, which would not be for 2 more days. $17, and her late husband's creditors had called every morning for 6 months, demanding the $12,000 that Marcus had left behind when he died of a stroke at 34. Demanding it with voices that sounded like hunger. Demanding it as if Elena had anywhere to get it. As if she was not already eating the leftovers from the kitchen at work because her daughter needed nutrition. As if she was not already working double shifts. As if she had not already sold her wedding ring. Derek took a step toward her. His shoes scraped against the linoleum. She did not move. The man in the charcoal suit shifted his weight slightly, and immediately, the 20 men in black suits shifted with him, a choreography so practiced it looked like a single organism changing shape. Derek stopped mid-step. The man with the storm cloud eye studied Elena for a moment longer. Then he turned and walked toward the stairs, his footsteps deliberate, unhurried, descending into the darkness below. The 20 men followed. Derek stood frozen in the hallway, his fists still clenched, understanding that whatever force had just arrived was infinitely more powerful than anything he possessed. He turned and went after them. The hallway fell silent except for the sound of the heart monitor inside Ava's room. Beep! 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 Elena leaned against the door and realized she was crying. She had not eaten in 18 hours. Her feet ached from a double shift at the diner. She had no idea who those men were or why they had come to her apartment building at nearly midnight. But in her bones, in the place where mothers carry ancient instinct, she knew that something fundamental had just shifted. Something cold and dangerous had moved through her hallway and then moved away, carrying with it a threat it had not needed to speak aloud. She did not know that 7 days earlier, on a rain-soaked night in an underground poker room on Hanover Street, she had done something that would echo through the underworld of Boston. She did not know that she had stood between armed thugs and a terrified young dealer, her voice steady even as thunder rolled outside. She did not know that she had caught the attention of the one man in this city whose attention could change everything. Before we continue, drop a like if this story hits you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming tomorrow. Now let us go back to the beginning, to understand how a widow with $17 in her pocket came to stand between a mafia boss and the man who wanted to destroy her. 22 days earlier. The diner called the Golden Spoon sat on Atlantic Avenue with its neon sign flickering like a tired heartbeat. Elena had been working the breakfast and dinner shifts for 8 months, ever since Marcus died and the medical bills came and kept coming. The owner, a man named Tony who wore a stained apron and never asked questions, paid her in cash at the end of each shift. It was not enough. It was never enough. On this particular Tuesday, Elena had been on her feet for 14 hours. Her apron was stained with coffee and grease. Her hair, which used to be a dark copper color before stress had bleached it gray at the temples, was pulled back in a braid so tight it hurt her scalp. She was 28 years old but looked 40. Ava was upstairs in their apartment with Mrs. Chen, an elderly neighbor who sometimes watched her for free, though Elena always left what she could, a bag of groceries, a carton of good milk, her dignity left at the door like a pair of wet shoes. The cardiologist had called that morning with a diagnosis. A valve replacement. $22,000. Within 14 days. Elena had listened to the words and felt something inside her go very still. She had said yes and thank you and I understand, and then she had hung up the phone and counted her money. $17. Bills piling on the kitchen table like accusatory fingers. A daughter whose heart was dying piece by piece inside her small chest. At 10 o'clock that evening, a man had come into the diner asking about a poker game. He was thin, nervous, with eyes that darted around the room like he was looking for exits. He had ordered coffee and asked, very quietly, if Elena knew where a game might be happening. Down on Hanover Street. Underground. Where people with nothing to lose went to gamble away what they had left. Elena had considered her options. They were not options. They were just different ways of losing. She had written down the address. 2 hours later, she had crossed the threshold into an underground room lit by a single hanging bulb that swung slightly despite there being no wind. The walls were brick, sweating moisture. The smell of cigarette smoke and spilled whiskey hung in the air like a curse. Around a green felt table, men in suits counted money. Hundreds. Thousands. Men who looked like they had eaten enough meals in their lives to last them and their children and their children's children. One of them was a young dealer. He could not have been more than 19, with acne scarring his chin and fear making his hands shake as he dealt cards. He was trying not to look at the man sitting directly across from him. The man with the leather briefcase at his feet. The man whose eyes were flat and empty as a statue's. That man was Harold Brennan. Elena did not know his name yet. She would learn it later, when Cordelia Blackwood whispered it to her with a smile designed to cut like a blade. Harold Brennan owed money to Elena's landlord. $12,000. The kind of debt that did not get forgiven just because a man had lost his nerve. The young dealer's hands trembled as he turned over another card. And that was when Elena moved. She walked to the table. She stood between the armed men and the terrified boy. And she spoke, her voice steady even as thunder rolled outside, even as rain began to hammer against the small basement window. "You cannot do this to him. He is a child." The men in the room turned to look at her. The man with the flat eyes leaned back slightly. One of the other men laughed, a sound like broken glass. "Who is this woman?" the man with the flat eyes asked. His voice was soft. That made it worse somehow, that his voice was soft. "Someone who believes in mercy," Elena said. She did not move. She did not look away. She simply stood there in her diner uniform, $17 in her pocket, a daughter dying in a hospital bed, and spoke as if she had authority. As if she had power. As if she was anything more than nobody, just a night shift waitress trying to survive until tomorrow. But what she did not know was that in the corner of that room, half hidden by shadow, Giovanni Corsetti was watching. He had come to the game to collect a debt from Harold Brennan. He had not expected to see a woman stand between his men and a boy. He had not expected to see defiance that came from something deeper than pride. He had not expected anything to move him in a very long time. But there she stood. And in the way she stood, in the way her hands did not shake, in the way her voice carried something he recognized, something he had built an entire empire on, loyalty. Desperate loyalty. The kind that could not be bought because it was not for sale. The storm raged outside. Inside the basement room, two forces held each other's gaze, and everything that came next began in that moment. Everything. Sometimes the people who seem invisible carry the greatest light. 1 week before that basement. 1 week before the rain. 1 week before everything changed. Dr. Morrison's office smelled like sanitizer and broken hope. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, that particular hum that made Elena's temples throb. She sat in a chair that was too small, holding Ava's hand, and listened to words that fell like stones into still water. Congenital mitral valve defect, the cardiologist said. He was older, maybe 60, with kind eyes that made the cruelty of his words even sharper. The valve isn't closing properly. Blood is backing up into her lungs. Ava was 7 years old. She sat beside her mother in a pink dress with a hole in the seam that Elena had sewn 3 times already. The child swung her feet, which did not reach the ground. She did not understand what broken meant. "Surgery," Dr. Morrison continued, "will correct it. But it needs to happen within 14 days. After that, the damage becomes irreversible." Elena's fingers tightened around Ava's hand. "How much?" $22,000. The number hung in the air. 22,000. Elena had $17 in her checking account. 17. After paying rent on an apartment that was slowly collapsing, after buying Ava's medications, after the electric bill and the water bill and the thing called living, she had $17. "Your insurance?" Dr. Morrison asked, already knowing the answer because he asked this question every day to women like Elena. "Denied the claim. Pre-existing condition. They said it's not covered." "I'm sorry," he said. And he was. You could hear it in his voice. But sorry did not pay for surgery. Sorry did not save a 7-year-old girl's life. Elena drove home in silence. Ava dozed in the back seat, her small chest rising and falling, each breath a miracle that would stop being a miracle in 14 days if Elena did not produce $22,000 from nowhere. The apartment was on the 3rd floor of a building that had been beautiful once, maybe in 1987. Now the hallway smelled like boiled cabbage and something else, something sharp and chemical that Elena tried not to think about. She unlocked the door and felt the weight of it immediately. The heaviness. The impossible weight of keeping a child alive on $17. Ava's medical equipment occupied half the living room. A monitor for her heart. Oxygen tanks standing like sentries in the corner. A cot where Elena had slept for the last 8 months because the bedroom was too small for both of them and Ava needed to be close, needed to be watched, needed to not die in her sleep. Elena sat on the couch and opened the mail. Electric company final notice. The words were printed in red. 3 weeks to pay or disconnection. $43. She did not have $43. The landlord's notice came next. Mr. Petrov wanted 3 months back rent. $4,800. The amount was so large it almost seemed fictional. Then the phone rang. Mrs. Bennett, this is account management at Premier Credit Solutions. This is the 4th time we've called this week. Elena's chest tightened. She knew this voice. She had heard it many times. Your husband's outstanding debt is $11,700, the voice continued. Your husband is deceased, but his debts do not disappear because he is deceased. You are the surviving spouse. You are responsible for. I don't have the money, Elena whispered. What was that? I said I don't have the money. A pause. Then, Mrs. Bennett, I understand this is difficult. But the debt exists. It must be paid. We can set up a payment plan of $300 per month. $300 per month. Elena made $8 an hour as a waitress. Before taxes. Before the deductions. She would work 40 hours a week and still not have $300 to give to dead men's creditors. She hung up the phone. Her hands were shaking. At 6 in the evening, Elena changed into her diner uniform, white polyester that had faded from actual white to the color of old bone. The restaurant was on Hanover Street, in the basement level of a building that housed other things upstairs, things Elena did not think about. She worked the night shift because the night shift paid slightly more and because Ava slept better when Elena was gone, when she was not there watching the child breathe, counting each one, terrified of the one that would not come. Romano's diner smelled like grease and regret. The same regret that lived in Elena's chest. She tied her apron and began the shift. A couple from out of town ordered pasta. A businessman ordered coffee. A woman with tired eyes like Elena's ordered soup. Elena carried the plates, smiled the smile she had learned to smile, and felt nothing except the ache in her feet. At 11 o'clock, Tony Romano, the manager, pulled her aside. He was maybe 50, with a cigarette always burning behind his ear even though smoking was illegal. Your landlord was here, he said. Elena's throat went dry. Mr. Petrov. He asked about you. Said you're 3 months behind on rent. Said he's getting tired of waiting. Tony looked at her the way men looked at drowning women, with sympathy but also distance. He mentioned he owns this building too. The building. Of course he owned the building. Of course. I'll have the rent next week, Elena heard herself say. Tony nodded. He did not believe her. She did not believe her either. The shift ended at 3 in the morning. Elena walked home through Boston streets that belonged to no one. The November cold cut through her jacket. She did not own a proper winter coat. The jacket was from the Salvation Army, men's style, size large, which meant it fit her loosely and made her look smaller than she was. At 9 o'clock the next morning, Elena was trying to sleep in the chair by Ava's cot when she heard it. A truck. A loud truck idling outside. She moved to the window carefully, without disturbing Ava, and looked down. Derek Collins leaned against a black truck that was not his. He was 6'2", with arms covered in tattoos that he had gotten while drinking with his friends. One tattoo said her name. Elena. He had gotten it when they were together, before she married someone else, before she learned what it meant to be loved by someone who did not know how to love anything except the idea of possession. He was looking up at her window. A text arrived on her phone. She did not want to look at it, but her eyes betrayed her. I know you're struggling. I can help. Let me see you. Another text came through almost immediately. I know you have money problems. I know you have a daughter. I can help with both. Elena stepped back from the window. Her breath came shallow. 6 months ago, when Derek had first come around, she had gone to the police station with a printed email where he described in detail what he wanted to do to her. The officer, Detective Marino, had known Derek. They had gone to high school together. Detective Marino had read the email and then said, "He's just venting. He's got a temper but he's not dangerous." She had applied for a restraining order anyway. It had been granted. 2 weeks ago, Detective Marino had called her. "We can't enforce this without concrete evidence of a direct threat. Right now, it's just communication. He says he wants to help. That's not technically illegal." He had suggested she take down the restraining order and try to work things out with Derek instead. She had deleted the document from her phone that same day because the weight of it had become too much. The weight of fighting something that everyone else seemed to think was acceptable. Now Derek was outside her building. She went to Ava's cot and lifted her daughter carefully. The child was still asleep, one hand curled into a fist. Elena carried her away from the window, into the bedroom, and closed the door. She did not turn on the light. She sat on the bed in darkness and held her daughter and felt the small heartbeat against her chest, that broken, defective heartbeat that would stop in 14 days if Elena could not produce $22,000. Outside, the November wind howled down Hanover Street. 3 blocks away, above the basement of Romano's diner, men in expensive suits moved through a room that smelled like cigar smoke. One of them was discussing a debt. A man named Harold Brennan owed money to a man named Petrov. $7,000. Interest was compounding. Soon it would be impossible to pay. Petrov did not take kindly to impossible debts. What Eleanor did not know, what she could not possibly have known, was that Petrov's collection agent was Giovanni Corsetti. Not a typical collection agent. A man who collected debts the way other men collected paintings, with an appreciation for the art of pressure, the weight of consequence, the perfect moment when everything a person owned would slip away. Giovanni was going to attend the poker game tonight. He was going to collect from Harold Brennan. And upstairs, in a building that Giovanni's reach extended into like fingers, a woman was sitting in the dark holding the only thing she had left to lose. The storm was building. You could feel it coming. The pressure in the air. The electricity before the lightning. Everything was about to change. But none of them knew it yet. Not Elena. Not Derek outside her window. Not Giovanni Corsetti moving through the city like a blade wrapped in ice. None of them knew that in 4 hours, their paths would converge. That a woman with $17 would stand between armed men and her own survival. That sometimes the people who seem invisible carry the greatest light. The November wind tore through the north end of Boston like a blade wrapped in ice, carrying the smell of salt from the harbor and cigarette smoke from 1,000 closed doors. Elena Bennett descended the narrow stairs into darkness, each footstep creaking under her worn sneakers, the sound swallowed by the hum of fluorescent light somewhere below. She had $17 in her checking account. 17. A number so small it barely existed. But above her, in the humid streets of the city, that number meant the difference between her daughter living and dying. The underground poker room opened before her like the mouth of a predator. Green felt tables glowed under dim pendant lights. Stacks of cash and chips towered like monuments to a world she did not belong in. 25 men in black suits and shoulder holsters visible beneath open jackets. And one young woman dealer, barely 20 years old, her hands trembling as she shuffled cards at the center table. A bald man in a grey suit, Marcus, though Elena did not know his name yet, stood abruptly when the young dealer fumbled 2 cards onto the floor. His voice cut through the room like a whip. "You trying to cheat us, sweetheart?" He reached for her wrist. Elena did not think. Her body moved before her mind caught up. She stepped between them, her voice steady even though thunder rolled outside, pressing down on the city like a fist. "She's terrified and you're not helping. Back off." The room crystallized into silence. 25 pairs of eyes turned toward her. Marcus laughed, his breath reeking of whiskey and cruelty. "And who the hell are you?" From the shadows at the center table, a man leaned forward into the light. Age 42. Dark hair silvering at the temples. A scar running from his left eyebrow to his cheekbone like a map of violence. His suit was black and cost more than everything Elena owned combined. His name was Giovanni Corsetti, and he had not seen someone stand up for the week without calculation in 15 years. "Let her go, Marcus," Giovanni said. His voice was not loud. It did not need to be. Marcus released the young dealer instantly, stepped backward, his face draining of color. Giovanni's eyes studied Elena, the grease stain on her waitress collar, her trembling hands, her chin lifted in defiance. "You interrupted a private game," he said. "Why?" "I'm looking for someone who owes money to Petrov," Elena said. "But I'm not going to watch you terrorize a kid." Giovanni's lieutenant Rocco, thick-necked, hands like hammers, began moving toward Elena. Giovanni raised one finger. Rocco stopped as if he had hit an invisible wall. Enzo, the other lieutenant, scarred and lean, exchanged a glance with Rocco that said, "Something is different tonight." "What's your name?" Giovanni asked. "Elena Bennett." The name meant nothing to him, but everything about her did. The desperate loyalty in her eyes. The same thing that had driven him to build an empire on the ashes of his murdered father. He gestured to a chair. "Sit. We'll talk about Petrov's debt." The poker room emptied. Players gathered their chips. Dealers vanished upstairs. Within minutes, only Giovanni, Rocco, Enzo, Elena, and the trembling young dealer remained. Giovanni poured whiskey into 2 glasses, slid one toward Elena. She did not touch it. "Petrov sent you to collect from me?" Giovanni asked. Elena nodded. "He said you owe him money. He said if I get you to pay, he'd forgive 2 months of my rent. That's $9,600. Giovanni's expression did not change, but something cold flickered behind his eyes. "Petrov is using you. He knows I'll never pay him. He knows you'll fail. And he'll keep you in debt forever." He leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Why do you need $9,600 so badly?" Elena hesitated. Then the words came, like water bursting through a cracked dam. "My husband died 8 months ago. Warehouse accident. He left me $12,000 in debts, gambling debts I never even knew about. My daughter Ava, she's 6 years old. She has a congenital heart defect. Her cardiologist says she needs a mitral valve replacement surgery. $22,000. In 14 days, or she dies." Elena's voice cracked but did not break. "Insurance denied it. They said it was a pre-existing condition and we should have known better. I work double shifts at Romano's diner but the money disappears before I even deposit it. Creditors call every morning. My landlord wants $4,800 in back rent. My ex-boyfriend Derek shows up at my apartment, sends me threatening texts, but the police won't help because Derek drinks with them at McCarthy's bar every Friday and they told me the restraining order is just paper." She touched the gold locket at her throat, the only thing of value she possessed, thin and worn from decades of her mother's hands. "This was my mother's. It's worth maybe $300. If I sell it, I could make a payment, but then I'd lose the only piece of her I have left." Elena looked directly at Giovanni. "I shouldn't have come here. I'm sorry for interrupting your game." She stood to leave. "Sit down," Giovanni said. His voice was gentle but absolute. "Elena Saturday. Your daughter's name is Ava," Giovanni continued. 6 years old. Mitral valve replacement. Where is the surgery scheduled? Boston Children's Hospital. Dr. Morrison. Giovanni pulled out his phone and dialed. When someone answered, his voice became pure business. "I need Dr. Morrison's contact information at Children's. Personal line. Now." He listened, then hung up. His eyes returned to Elena. "You stood up for that dealer. You didn't know her. You had nothing to gain. Why?" "Because she was scared and nobody else would." Something shifted in Giovanni's face. The scar on his cheekbone seemed to deepen. Rocco and Enzo exchanged a look they had never shared in 15 years of working for him, a look that said, "Something has changed tonight." Giovanni's phone buzzed. He read the number, then made another call. His voice was low, measured. Transfer $22,000 to Boston Children's Hospital. Patient name, Ava Bennett. Put it in the account before tomorrow morning. He paused. No. No name. Anonymous donation. He hung up and looked at Elena. It's done. Elena's face went white. What? No. I can't accept. You can and you will, Giovanni said. Your daughter lives. That's not negotiable. Enzo's jaw clenched. In 15 years, he had never seen Giovanni give money away. Never seen him help anyone unless there was profit in it. But this woman, this nobody in a stained waitress uniform, had changed something. 20 blocks away, in a restaurant on Newbury Street where the wine cost more than Elena's monthly rent, a woman named Cordelia Blackwood sat with 2 city councilmen and a federal judge. Cordelia was 45, blonde hair twisted into a perfect crown, diamonds at her throat and wrists worth more than Elena's apartment building. She ran a charity foundation that was actually a money laundering operation for 3 crime families, including one of Giovanni's rivals. Her assistant approached and whispered, "Ms. Blackwood, Giovanni Corsetti was spotted at the North End poker room with an unknown woman." Cordelia's smile did not reach her eyes. "Find out everything about her. Everything. And do it quietly." That same night, at 1:56 a.m., Elena stood in the stairwell of her apartment building, holding Ava's hand. The child was asking if they could go see the snow tomorrow. Elena was about to say yes when a figure emerged from the darkness above them. Derek Collins. Drunk. Smelling of beer and cheap cologne. His face flushed with rage and whiskey. "I saw you get out of a fancy car," Derek slurred, blocking her path. "You got a new man now? You too good for me." Elena tried to move past him. He grabbed her wrist, his fingers digging into her skin. Ava made a small frightened sound. "Let go of me, Derek." "Or what? You'll call the cops?" "They're my friends, baby. They told me your restraining order is bullshit. Just paper." Elena twisted free, pulled Ava toward the apartment, and locked the door behind them. Derek's fists pounded against the wood from the other side. "This isn't over. You hear me? This isn't over." She slid down the door with Ava in her arms, her daughter's small body trembling against her chest. That broken heartbeat, thud-thud, thud-thud, the rhythm of a child whose time was running out. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. A text message appeared, "Check Ava's hospital account in the morning." Gee? Elena stared at the screen, unable to move, unable to breathe, unable to understand how a stranger with a scar had just saved her daughter's life while the world around her crumbled into pieces. Outside, parked across the street in a black Mercedes, Enzo sat watching the apartment building. He had seen Derek Collins attack her. He had recorded every moment on his phone. And tomorrow morning, Giovanni Corsetti would know exactly who Derek Collins was and what he had done. The storm was building. You could feel it in the air. The electricity before the lightning. Everything was about to change. The hospital phone felt heavy in Elena's trembling hands. 8 o'clock in the morning. Rain drummed against the apartment windows like an accusation. "Ms. Bennett." The billing department's voice crackled through the speaker. "We have you listed here. Your daughter's surgery. The valve replacement. Everything is cleared for 3 days from now." Elena's breath caught. But there's something unusual. An anonymous donation came through at 11:51 last night. $22,000. Exactly the amount of Ava's procedure. The account is fully funded. She's scheduled for Thursday at 7 in the morning. The phone slipped from Elena's fingers. It hit the carpet without a sound, swallowed by the white noise of rain and the apartment's worn heating system struggling to push warmth into the rooms where she and her daughter lived. $22,000. The exact figure that had been screaming in her nightmares for 6 weeks. The mountain she could never climb. She knew. In the deepest part of her bones, she knew who had done this. A man with a scar running from his eye to his cheekbone. A man whose presence felt like standing too close to a fire, the heat terrible and necessary all at once. Elena picked up the phone with both hands, afraid they would shake it apart. "Thank you," she whispered to no one. "Thank you." She hung up and walked to Ava's bedroom. Her daughter was still asleep, her small body curled beneath a threadbare blanket with cartoon princesses faded from 100 washings. The heart monitor beside the bed beeped its steady rhythm. Thud thud. Thud thud. The sound of time running out, but now time had stopped its countdown. Thursday. For days away. Elena sat on the edge of the bed, careful not to disturb Ava, and held her mother's gold locket so tightly the edges bit into her palm. She had worn this locket through her husband's death, through Derek's fists, through nights eating crackers and water while her daughter slept hungry in the next room. The locket was the only thing Derek had never broken. She had hidden it in a sock beneath the floorboard. But as she sat there in the half-light before dawn, gratitude twisted into something harder. Fear. Because men like Giovanni Corsetti did not give gifts. They built debts. They created obligations that demanded payment in ways she could not yet imagine. 2 hours later, at Romano's diner on Hanover Street, Elena tied her apron around her waist and tried to disappear into the rhythm of the lunch shift. Coffee, eggs, toast. Repeat. The other waitresses moved around her like she was a ghost. She was good at being invisible. At 1:44 p.m., as she pushed through the back door carrying a tray of dirty dishes, Derek Collins was waiting. He stepped out from behind the dumpster with his face already red, already furious, his body coiled like something about to strike. He wore the same security guard uniform he wore every night at the club, wrinkled, stained with vodka and rage. "You think you're something special now?" Derek's voice came out thick and wet. "I heard about your donation. I heard about the fancy man with the car. You sold yourself to some criminal. You, Elena. You who wouldn't even take $5 from my mother to help pay rent." Elena tried to walk past him. His hand closed around her arm like a vice. "I'm talking to you." He dragged her into the alley between the diner and the building next door. The rain had made the pavement slick. Her shoes skidded. Her shoulder hit the brick wall hard enough to knock the breath from her lungs. His other hand came up, fingers splayed toward her face. His wedding ring, gold, still on his finger even after everything, caught the grey light. "Your husband was trash," Derek hissed. "A gambler who couldn't even die right. He had to leave you with nothing. And now you're a whore for some mafia piece of." Elena brought her knee up in one sharp, pure motion. It connected with his groin. Derek's scream cut through the sound of the rain like something breaking. He staggered backward, both hands dropping to clutch himself, his face twisting purple. He raised his fist. His arm cocked back. A voice cut through the alley. "Touch her and you lose the hand." 2 men in dark suits stepped into the passage. Rocco and Enzo. Both moved with the kind of calm that came from knowing every outcome, every angle. Both carried themselves like violence was a language they had spoken since childhood. Derek's arm dropped. His breath came in panic gasps. "Who the hell are you?" His voice cracked like he was 16 years old. Rocco smiled. It was not the smile of a happy man. "We're friends of the lady. You have 6 hours to leave Boston. You take a bus, a car, a plane. You disappear. You become a name nobody remembers. And if I don't?" Derek's voice shook. Then, Enzo said quietly, stepping closer, "We make you leave in pieces. Parts of you scattered so far, your own mother wouldn't recognize the collection." Derek ran. He just turned and ran back toward the street, his breathing ragged, his legs unsteady. They heard him stumble once, heard him cry out. Then the rain swallowed the sound of his footsteps. Rocco turned to Elena. For a moment, neither of them moved. The rain fell harder, soaking through her diner uniform, turning the brick around them dark as blood. "Mr. Corsetti wanted you to know," Rocco said, "that what happened in that alley last night, after you locked your daughter in the apartment, he saw. His men were watching. Every second is recorded. Every threat Derek made in that stairwell. Every hand he laid on you." Elena's legs felt suddenly weak. "The donation to the hospital," Rocco continued. "That was not from us. That was from a foundation that exists only on paper. No one can trace it back to anyone. The Federal Bureau of Investigation could search until they turned gray and they would find nothing but shadows." "Why would he?" Elena started, but her voice gave out. Enzo stepped closer, rain dripping from his dark hair. "Because," he said, "in 15 years of working for Giovanni Corsetti, I have never seen him look at another person the way he looked at you. Like you were a light in a room he thought was permanently dark. Like you reminded him that there were still people in this world willing to die for someone they loved." They left her there in the alley, rain pouring down, her uniform soaked, her hands shaking like someone had cut her strings. But what Elena did not know was that Derek Collins would not run far. His connections to corrupt cops, the men he had bragged to at the club about how he had put her in line, those connections made him believe he had protection. They made him dangerous in the way small, desperate men become dangerous. He would make one last play. He would try to use what he knew to survive. That same afternoon, at 3 o'clock, a town car pulled up in front of Elena's apartment building. Cordelia Blackwood stepped out like she owned the sidewalk. She always moved that way, as if the ground itself was lucky to support her weight. She wore a cream silk blouse that cost more than Elena's monthly rent. Her blonde hair fell in perfect waves. Her jewelry caught the weak Boston sunlight and threw it back in sharp, cutting angles. Behind her came a photographer with a camera that looked like a weapon, and a reporter Elena recognized from a tabloid that specialized in destroying people's lives while pretending to tell the truth. Cordelia entered the lobby of Elena's building and pressed the buzzer for apartment 3B. Elena was not home, she was still at the diner, still trying to stop her hands from shaking. Cordelia waited 3 minutes, then pressed it again. No answer. She turned to the reporter, smiled, and they began to set up. The photographer started taking pictures. Of the building. Of the buzzers. Of the worn carpet and the stain on the ceiling where the roof had leaked for 2 winters. When Elena finally arrived home at 5:33 p.m., exhausted and hollow from her shift, Cordelia was waiting in the lobby with the reporter and photographer flanking her like wings. "Miss Bennett," Cordelia's voice carried the false warmth of someone about to cut you open. "I'm so glad I caught you. I have some questions about your relationship with Giovanni Corsetti." Elena's blood went cold. She tried to move past them. Cordelia stepped directly into her path. "Is it true that you met him less than 2 weeks ago? That he's made an anonymous donation of $22,000 to your daughter's hospital fund? That you're involved with a known organized crime figure?" The photographer began snapping pictures. Click. 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 "I'm not," Elena started. "My sources tell me you've been using your sick daughter as leverage," Cordelia continued, her voice honeyed with concern. "That you seduced a dangerous man to exploit his money. Do you have any comment on that?" Elena's throat closed. The words tangled inside her like wire. "What kind of mother would do that?" Cordelia's voice dropped to a whisper, but it was pitched so the reporter could hear every syllable. "Using your dying child's medical condition to manipulate a criminal? Child Services is going to find this very interesting. The public is going to find this very interesting." She turned to the reporter. "Make sure you mention the daughter. The sick daughter. Make sure everyone knows what kind of woman this is." Cordelia walked past Elena without another glance, the photographer and reporter trailing behind her like sharks that had tasted blood in the water. They left through the glass doors into the grey afternoon, leaving Elena standing alone in the lobby, her legs shaking so badly she had to sit down on the worn carpet. She made it to her apartment. She locked the door. She checked on Ava, who was sleeping, her small face peaceful, unaware that her mother was drowning. That night, rain fell as if the sky itself was grieving. Elena sat in Ava's room watching her daughter breathe, watching the monitor tick away the seconds, the minutes, the hours of a child's life that might be saved or might be lost. In 48 hours, it would matter. In 48 hours, surgery would happen or it wouldn't. Ava would live or she would become another name on a cemetery plot. But by morning, there would be a story in the tabloid. Child Services would make a phone call. Questions would be asked. Records would be examined. A mother with a sick child and an ex-boyfriend who kept showing up, a mother with no money and a stranger's mysterious donation, it would not look good. It would not look like rescue. It would look like desperation disguised as love. Elena walked to the bathroom at midnight. The mirror showed her a woman she almost didn't recognize. Hollow eyes. Skin like paper. Calloused hands from years of work that paid less than survival. She opened the medicine cabinet. There was a bottle there, sleeping pills, left over from grief counseling after her husband died. 40 pills. Maybe 50. She had never counted. Her hand reached for it. The bottle felt heavy, possible, final. In the other room, Ava coughed. A small sound. Barely audible over the drumming rain. A child's cough in the darkness. A sound that said, I am still here. I am still fighting. I am still your daughter. Elena's hand froze. She closed the medicine cabinet without taking the bottle. She walked back to Ava's room and sat beside her daughter's bed, holding the gold locket so tightly it burned her skin. She whispered into the darkness, I won't let them take you. I won't let anything take you. I swear it. What Elena did not know was that across the street, parked in a black Mercedes with rain hammering against the windshield, Giovanni Corsetti had been sitting in that car for 3 hours. Watching her windows. Watching her apartment building like a man guarding a shrine. He had seen Derek Collins dragged from the alley. He had heard about Cordelia's visit from Rocco, who had followed the town car to make sure the photographer and reporter left safely. Giovanni picked up his phone at 12:34 a.m. and made one call. It ends now, he said quietly. All of it. Make it permanent. The rain fell harder, drumming against the car, drumming against the city, drumming out a rhythm like a heartbeat counting down to justice. The cardiac wing of Boston Children's Hospital opened on a Thursday in May, and Elena Bennett stood in a white dress she had bought with her own salary, watching her daughter run through the garden outside the glass doors. Ava was 7 years old now, her heart repaired, her laugh carrying across the manicured lawn like music that had been silent for too long. A year ago, Elena had $17 in her pocket and a daughter dying. Now she had a job, a future, and a man she did not fully understand standing beside her in an Italian suit that cost more than a month of her old rent. Dr. Morrison approached with his hand extended. Ms. Bennett. Mr. Corsetti. Thank you for coming. The donation, it's extraordinary. This wing will save hundreds of children. Giovanni shook his hand, his expression composed, but Elena saw something shift in his eyes when the doctor mentioned the children. A crack in the wall he had built so carefully. My father died when I was 16, Giovanni said quietly. In a hospital not much different from this one. He didn't have the resources to survive. This wing, it ensures that other children do. The doctor nodded, understanding that this was not about charity, but about a wound that had never closed. After he left, Giovanni and Elena stood alone by the window, Ava visible in the distance, chasing a butterfly. Elena's mother's gold locket hung at her throat, the same locket she had clung to in the darkness of her apartment a year ago, when she almost took the bottle of sleeping pills from the medicine cabinet. She touched it now, a habit of hers, a way of saying thank you to the part of herself that had refused to give up. You saw my father's death, Elena said. In me. That night in the poker room. I saw someone who would die for someone else, Giovanni replied. I had built an empire to make sure I would never be powerless again. And then you walked into that room with nothing but your voice and your body between armed men and a stranger. You had already lost everything. You had no power, no money, no protection. And still you stood. Elena turned to face him. You could have simply helped me. The surgery, the job, you could have given me those things without the rest. Without the strings. There were no strings, Giovanni said. There were, Elena corrected gently. A year of watching me, protecting me, making decisions about my life without asking. I was grateful, but I was also trapped. I couldn't rebuild myself when you were carrying me. Giovanni was silent for a long moment. I didn't know that. I know, Elena said. That's why I'm telling you now. I've paid off my husband's debts. I've bought furniture for my apartment. I've saved Ava's college fund myself. I'm standing on my own, and I wanted you to know that I did it. Not because you allowed me to, but because I chose to. A sound came from the gardens, then Ava's voice, high and bright, calling out that she had caught the butterfly. Elena smiled, and when she looked back at Giovanni, she saw the 16-year-old boy behind the powerful man, the one who had watched his father die and spent 25 years ensuring he would never be helpless again. I'm not afraid of you, Elena said. I see you. Not the empire, not the danger. Just you. That night, they returned to Giovanni's home, a brownstone in the north end with windows overlooking the city. Ava was asleep in the guest room that had become hers on the weekends, her small hand clutching a stuffed rabbit that Giovanni had bought her 3 months ago. Elena had not objected. She had learned the difference between control and care, between manipulation and devotion. His actions had come from the same place hers did, the desperate need to protect someone who mattered. On the balcony, with the lights of Boston spreading below them, Giovanni told her the full story of his father's death. His voice broke only once, when he described standing in the hospital hallway at 16, watching his father's body covered with a white sheet, understanding in that moment that money and power would not matter unless they could prevent other people from experiencing that loss. You saved me, Elena said. I saved Ava, Giovanni corrected. You saved yourself. We both know it's more complicated than that, Elena replied, but she was smiling. You made sure I had the chance. You destroyed the people who tried to take her from me. You gave me space to rebuild. But I walked through that space with my own feet. I chose to come to you tonight, a year later, as someone equal. Not as someone you saved, but as someone who stood beside you because she wanted to. Giovanni pulled her close, and they stood together in the May darkness, the city humming below them. She thought of Derek Collins, now 3 years into a 40-year federal prison sentence, his abuse detailed in every courtroom transcript and splashed across every news outlet for 6 months straight. She thought of Cordelia Blackwood, her reputation destroyed, her money frozen by the FBI, her final days spent in a modest apartment in New Jersey, unrecognizable to the woman who had worn diamonds and wielded cruelty like a weapon. Justice had not looked like mercy. It had looked like the systematic dismantling of everything they believed made them powerful. And Elena had not asked for it. Giovanni had simply understood what needed to happen and made it happen, the way he made everything happen, with precision, with finality, with no room for appeal. But standing on this balcony, with his arms around her and the locket warm against her skin, Elena understood that she had given him something his power could never buy. She had given him the choice to become something more than what his father's death had made him. She had looked at the dangerous man and seen the wounded boy, and she had chosen to stay. I love you, she said quietly. Not because you saved me. But because when you could have crushed me, you protected me instead. When you could have owned me, you waited a year for me to choose you. That's who you are. That's who you've always been underneath everything else. Giovanni held her tighter, and neither of them spoke again until the city lights began to fade and the sun crested the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. A new day breaking over Boston. A woman and a man who understood that sometimes survival required becoming something dangerous, but love required choosing to become something gentle. This is a story about invisibility and power, about the people who seem to own nothing and the people who seem to own everything, and how easily those positions can be reversed when someone finally chooses to see you. Elena Bennett had walked into an underground poker room with $17 in her pocket and desperation in her eyes, and she had changed the trajectory of the most powerful man in Boston simply by standing between armed men and a stranger, offering protection she could not afford to give. And Giovanni, who had built an empire on the wound of his father's death, had found redemption in a woman who refused to let him be defined by that wound forever. If this story moved your heart, please like this video and subscribe. Share it with someone who needs to hear that sometimes the invisible people carry the greatest light. Drop a comment and tell us, would you have stood up to armed men to protect a stranger? Sometimes the people who seem invisible carry the greatest light. Thank you for staying with us until the very end.